As I entered the lobby of our hotel located on Chicago's Gold Coast, my anger cooled a bit. I went from white-hot rage to seething anger as I looked around the lobby. The faint hope that Linda had either changed her mind or was waiting to surprise me and laugh at how I fell for her prank. Of course, neither of those things happened. Glancing at the clock above the front desk, I realized it was still early. It wasn't even 11 o'clock yet. Instead of going straight to the elevators, I took a sharp right and entered the nearly empty bar. The bartender had just had time to put my old-fashioned drink in front of me before I noticed a woman walk up to the bar and sit down at a table. She looked to be in her early 20s, walking confidently with her head held high. Her raven-colored hair was styled into a chignon, and her red lips and flawless skin exuded a sophisticated sexiness. She wore a tight-fitting deep purple velvet dress with long sleeves that left her shoulders bare. She wore a black velvet choker with an ivory silhouette. Her only jewelry was a gold watch with a thin gold band. She glanced around the room before taking a seat at the bar. Suddenly, the bartender placed a glass of white wine in front of the woman. A working girl, I thought to myself, but definitely high class. The woman looked around the bar, her gaze sliding over me, but then back at me when she noticed my candid stare. She tilted her head slightly to one side as if silently asking, "Yes? No? Maybe?" While I was looking at her, an idea popped into my head. An idea so outrageous that if I pursued it, Linda wouldn't just taste her own medicine, but would completely gut and devastate her just as I felt gutted and devastated. I left my seat and walked around the bar to approach the woman. "May I?" I asked, pointing to the empty bar stool next to her. "Sure," she replied. Besides being insanely beautiful, she had the sexiest accent that, to my untrained eye, sounded French. I extended my hand to her, and she reciprocated by squeezing it tightly. "I'm Jim Williams," I said. "Ellen Fontaine," she replied, nodding her head slightly. "Please don't think me rude," I began, "but it looks like you're looking for a companion for this evening." She gave me an appraising look. "Are you suggesting this companionship?" "Yes, but not in the way you think." "And what am I thinking?" Ellen asked. "You think I'm just another asshole from out of town who wants to pay you for your time? But if you're not that Jim Williams, then who are you?" "I'm someone who is willing to pay you a good amount of money for something that won't take up much of your time." "How much money, and what do you want me to do to earn that money?" I shrugged. $5,000 for 4 or 5 hours of your time tomorrow? Ellen threw me a surprised look. "Tomorrow? Not today?" I shook my head sadly, answering, "I'm too upset to even think about sex tonight. Truth be told, I might not even be ready tomorrow, but I have to do something to get my self-respect back." I felt tears come to my eyes and start to roll down my cheeks. Ellen grabbed my forearm, a concerned expression on her face. She pulled me away from the bar and led me to a table in the corner. She returned for our drinks and then, taking her seat, leaned forward and looked at me seriously. "What happened to you, Jim?" I told her the whole story, starting with my almost 10-year marriage to Linda, our children, the building of the new house that was to be our forever home and where we had moved into last year. Then about how awful February had been and that tonight was a chance for us to reconnect. I told her about Linda's blue dress and how stunning she looked in it, how she promised me all her dances. I told her how Marc Lavaliere swooped in and took her away to dance, and Linda left without even looking back at me. How she had conspired with one of her friends to sneak out the back door and leave with Lavaliere. How she expected me to be waiting for her at home when she returned from her once-in-a-lifetime event. How all of our friends knew what had happened and laughed about it, laughing at me. Ellen was shocked. "That's the most disrespectful thing I've ever heard my wife say." Ellen shook her head in bewilderment. "Apparently you have a plan for revenge that includes me. What is your plan?" As I explained my plan, her smile faded. "I think she's going to be very angry with you. It could be the end of your marriage if you follow this plan." I nodded in agreement. It could be the end. Our marriage is over anyway. I just want her to get a taste of what she put me through tonight. "I don't go home with strangers," Ellen said. I think your plan will fail if I don't go to your house and I don't go to the homes of men I don't know. I nodded my head in agreement. Yes, for my plan to work, you have to go to my house. How about this? I'll wire you $2,500 right now. You can also take a picture of my driver's license. You go home and study me for as long as you want. I have a pretty big internet footprint because of my work, so I'll be easy to find. I'm not on Facebook, but my wife Linda is, so you'll be able to check out anything I tell you. If you agree to help me, come to my house tomorrow morning. I'll wire you the other half of the money, and we can put my plan into action. Ellen smiled and nodded her head. I can live with that. But how do you know I won't just leave $2,500 with you and not show up tomorrow? I looked Ellen in the eye. Is that what I have to worry about with you? Ellen grinned and replied, Not at all. Unlike your wife, I fulfill my obligations. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning when I walked into the cold emptiness of what had once been a happy home. I set my alarm for 8 and fell asleep almost immediately. After showering and shaving, I made coffee and toast, contemplating my situation. Clearly, my marriage was over. Linda's behavior could never be undone, and if my plan worked as I had hoped, she wouldn't forgive me either. Toward 9 o'clock, I called Mrs. Porter and asked her to keep the children for a few more hours, as something had come up that needed our attention. She happily agreed to keep Tommy and Emma for the rest of the day. I went into my home office and began researching information about divorce in Illinois and what I could expect. I was a counselor and worked from home, and I hadn't had to travel for work in years. Working from home allowed me to take on an exorbitant role in raising Emma and Tommy. Every morning I made breakfast and lunches before they left for school. After lunch, I helped them with their homework and cooked dinner, so when Linda came over, she had nothing to do but relax with a glass of wine. On a good day, she'd get to work in 30 minutes each way, but 45 to 60 minutes was more the norm. She also often worked 45 to 50 hours a week. It never occurred to me until today that she might be using this supposed overtime to cheat. From what I had read online, I had an excellent chance of getting primary custody of our children, although due to the difference in our incomes, I would probably have to pay child support. At 9 o'clock, I heard a car door slam and then the front doorbell rang. Looking out the window, I saw a BMW parked in my driveway, and opening the front door, I ushered Ellen into the house. She was casually dressed in a light yellow sundress and white Tory Burch ballet flats. Her hair was loose and held back with a headband to match the dress. Even in casual wear, she was simply stunning. "Your house is beautiful," she exclaimed as she looked around the entrance. I gave her a little tour of the house, explaining that we had only lived in it for a little over a year. This was supposed to be our forever home, a place where our children could grow up and come back to visit with their children. Linda and I often talked about how wonderful it would be to retire and have a house full of grandchildren to spoil. I heard the bitterness in my voice. She took all that away from me. She shattered that dream without the slightest hesitation. "Oh, Jim, I'm so sorry you're hurting. You must try to reconcile with your wife. If we do as you plan, there may be no turning back for either of you." I shook my head and continued the tour. The tour ended in the room Linda had called the master bedroom, but which I still called the master bedroom despite my wife's mild rebukes. Old habits are hard to give up, but hard doesn't mean impossible. Linda and I had long ago developed the habit of showing each other affection. So yes, some people's habits are easier to break than others. "Have a seat on the bed. I'll get it right away," I said as I left for my home office. Our house was 2 stories. The first floor had a large family room, a more formal living room, kitchen, master bedroom, and my office. The second floor was occupied by the kids' bedrooms, 2 guest rooms, and a large game room. In my office on the first floor was a large 3x7 fireproof gun safe. It did hold 1 pistol, a Colt M 1911 that my great-grandfather had carried in the Army during World War II. But the main reason for the safe's existence was the white garment bag hanging from a rod welded to the back of the safe. Grabbing the bag, I walked back to the bedroom with it and placed it on the bed. The bag was made of heavy white canvas and lined around the edges with tan-colored leather. The top of the bag was reinforced with the same leather to secure it in suspension. Since the bag was made before zippers, there was a row of leather straps with buckles running down the center of the bag to keep it closed. I undid all the straps and unzipped the bag to reveal the white dress it contained. Linda's wedding dress. But not just any wedding dress. Ellen pulled the dress out of the bag, glancing carelessly at the label. She sighed and let the hanger out of her hands. "Do you know what this is?" she asked incredulously. "I know. I'm the one who pays the homeowner's insurance. I have special insurance on this fucking dress." "You didn't tell me about that. I can't help you with that," Ellen said, shaking her head irritably. "Hear me out," I replied, raising my hands in what I hoped was a calming gesture, preparing to convince her to help me. My parents had moved to our North Shore town outside of Chicago when I was in 3rd grade. Linda's family, on the other hand, had lived in our town for generations. Linda's great-great-grandfather was president of the First National Bank in our town. This was decades before the advent of retail banking, which placed bank branches in every shopping center in town and gave the bank manager the same level of prestige as the manager of Arby's. In the old days, when there were only 1 or 2 banks in town, the bank manager held an important position in the community and was one of the wealthiest men in town. Such was the case with Linda's great-great-grandfather. When his only daughter became engaged, his wife and daughter took an ocean cruise from New York to Southampton, England, then a ferry from Portsmouth to Le Havre, France, and from there, a train to Paris. In Paris, Linda's great-great-grandparents appeared by appointment at one of the most famous addresses in all of France, 31 Rue Cambon, Coco Chanel's salon. As Ellen ran her hand over the label, I smiled sardonically. For a generation of people only familiar with the back-and-forth intertwined double C logo, seeing a different label would have been a big wake-up call, but not to Ellen. At the hotel, as we chatted, she told me her story. Ellen was born in Nice to educated and moderately well-to-do parents and moved to Paris to study fashion design. She interned at the very fashion house that so long ago made the wedding dress she now held in her hands. Instead of the famous double S on the label, it read Gabrielle Chanel. The letter L in the word Chanel ended in a plume that flew back and emphasized her name. Underneath it was the word Paris. There was a pocket sewn onto the panel of the bag, and I pulled out its contents to show Ellen. In the pocket were drawings and sketches of a dress signed by Gabrielle Chanel. Also in the pocket was a check for the dress that had the price 1,958 inches written on it. At the top of the check was written simply Chanel Boutique and an address on Rue Cambon. The words entièrement payé, paid in full, were written on the front of the check, and Gabrielle Chanel's signature was written underneath. In the store, Madame Chanel herself took the measurements and showed the drawings of the wedding dress, to the delight of mother and daughter. A deposit was paid, a date was set for the final fitting, and the couple traveled by train to the French Riviera, where they spent the next few weeks relaxing and waiting for the dress to be ready. Upon returning to Paris and seeing the wedding dress, both mother and daughter wept at the beauty of the outfit. Dazzling white, adorned with delicate lace and intricate beadwork, the dress was a work of art. The neckline was only slightly daring for the time, but the attached lace shawl could be used to cover the breasts if necessary. They stayed in Paris for another week to pick out shoes and the rest of her toilette before making the return trip and returning home, 3 months after leaving. The story of how the dress came to be became an integral part of Linda's family's oral history. Everyone knew the story of the Chanel wedding dress, the legend of it, and the dress were passed down to subsequent generations. The Chanel wedding dress was worn by Linda's great-grandmother, then Linda's grandmother. Linda's mom married in the dress, and most recently, almost 10 years ago, Linda wore the dress to our wedding. Emma was to be the 5th generation to wear this dress. "I can't do that," Ellen said. "Please, it's sacrilege." "Do you know the story of Coco Chanel?" "I know she has a complicated history," Ellen said. "No, it really isn't. My great-grandfather flew B-17 bombers during World War II as part of the Army Air Corps. He had a brother who fought in a tank corps with Patton in North Africa. Another brother served in the infantry in France. Both brothers were killed in action, and my great-grandfather was severely wounded by anti-aircraft fire. He never fully recovered from his wounds. I will never buy a Mercedes-Benz because they made engines for the Nazis. I will never buy a Hugo Boss suit because they sewed uniforms for the Waffen-SS. I will never own an IBM computer or IBM stock because they knowingly participated in supplying the Nazis with punch cards and computer systems to better run the death camps. Coco Chanel at best collaborated with the Nazis, and at worst, there is strong evidence that she spied for them. I don't care about Coco Chanel or that dress. Ellen nodded her head sadly. I hadn't told her anything she didn't know from working in the fashion industry or interning for Chanel. I knew as much about Chanel as I did because I'd done my research when deciding how much to buy the damn dress for. Our homeowner's insurance policy had a special addendum insuring the Chanel dress for $150,000. The drawings and receipt, certified and signed by Coco Chanel herself, increased the value by $100,000. Thus, the dress with accompanying documentation was insured for $250,000. If that's what you really want, I'll accept it. But I think you're making a serious mistake if you want any chance of being reunited with your wife. By this time, it was already 10 o'clock, and I had no idea what time Linda was going to grace us with her presence. I sent Ellen the remaining $2,500 via Venmo and began unbuttoning my shirt while she pulled her sundress over her head. I couldn't help but pay attention to her body as she began to prepare the Chanel for wear. Ellen's breasts were small, with long nipples. Her body was slender, with muscles visible under the flesh of her belly. Her ass was firm and well-proportioned to the rest of her body. Ellen had clearly spent a lot of time working out. She was stunning. Ellen slipped into Linda's wedding dress and turned around for me to button the loops in the back. The dress had no zippers, so the closure was a series of loops that fastened with buttons covered in the same fabric as the dress. I placed the bag of clothes on the floor in front of the bed, a few feet from the bedroom door so it could be seen from the doorway. I'm not going to button the dress all the way up, I told her, and she nodded. The thought that she might have to undress in a hurry didn't leave me. Naked, I lay on the bed and watched her remove her blindfold and shoes. She was a beautiful woman who, due to extraordinary bad luck during COVID, found herself without a home or a job. At the bar, Ellen revealed that during her internship at Chanel, she had had the opportunity to work closely with Karl Lagerfeld, the famous designer who had brought the Chanel brand back from the brink of demise in the early 80s and restored it to the glory it had been famous for under Coco Chanel. After 5 years at Chanel, and after the death of her parents, Ellen emigrated to the United States. She had enough savings to open her own clothing boutique on Oak Street in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. Her boutique opened to great success in February 2020, but a month after the grand opening, the world was shut down due to the COVID pandemic. In a matter of months, Ellen lost everything, including her business, home, and car. With limited options, she made the choice women have made for centuries: sell her body in an attempt to keep some semblance of a soul. She turned to escort services and worked as a prostitute for 2 years to pay off her debts. She had a full-time job, which she refused to tell me about, but she hoped to stop doing escorting for the next 2 years. Her story was sad and certainly believable, but I'm not naive or gullible enough to believe every sad story told to me by a beautiful woman, especially one who makes a living playing on men's feelings and emotions. Yet there was a sense of melancholy in her account of how she found herself alone in the hotel bar last night. She arrived at the client's room at the appointed time. She had visited this client once before, and the experience had not been the worst. Not great, but at least not terrible. This time, however, when she knocked on the door of the client's hotel room, it was swung open by a large, angry woman with makeup on, tears streaming down her face. "He doesn't need a whore tonight!" the woman shouted to Ellen and slammed the door in her face. A shaken Ellen went to the bar to have a glass of wine and recover, and that's when I noticed her. When Ellen climbed into bed with me, she started playing with me. She had already explained that there were some strict rules that I had to agree to. We would not kiss, and we would not have sex without a condom. We weren't dating, and this was strictly a business deal. She wasn't looking for a white knight to save her from death. I was fine with all of that. I had always had a high libido, and although last night I had worried about whether I could ever want a woman again, it soon became obvious that the answer was yes. Yes, I would like another woman. Under Ellen's skillful guidance, I didn't last long and soon erupted into rubber. She smiled and said, "That was fast. Do you always come down that fast?" I laughed back. "No. Can I return the favor?" Her smile immediately turned into a sad, wistful frown. "You should never offer that to an escort. If you ask, you'll be lied to." "Would you lie to me?" I asked. Ellen looked away from me for a moment, then looked me in the eye again. "No, Jim, I wouldn't lie to you." "Is there any reason why I shouldn't lower myself to you?" Ellen shook her head. "It's been over a week since I last met with a client. I live alone and am not in a relationship. If you'd like to perform oral sex on me, I'd be happy to oblige, but it's not necessary." "It's almost noon," she said. "Do you think she'll stay with him another night?" "I don't think so. She'll start to miss the kids, and at some point, I think she'll have guilt. She may not show it, but she'll feel it." "I'll just keep you in suspense until she gets here," Ellen said with a smirk. So she did. We heard the throaty roar of a sports car coming to a stop on the street in front of our house. Since the driveway was occupied by Ellen's BMW, the driver had no choice but to pull to the curb. The car idled for a few minutes, and my imagination kicked into full gear as I pictured them kissing in front of our house. Inside, in front of, the house. Not caring if there were children at home or if anyone might see her and her lover. If I had any doubts about my next move, they were gone. When the front door opened, Linda called out, "Jim, Emma, Tommy, I'm home. Same old me. Where is everyone?" Ellen kissed my cheek and then climbed on top of me and stood facing the bedroom door. "Jim, you're back? Whose BMW is in the driveway?" shouted Linda. I could tell from her voice that she was approaching the bedroom as I continued to walk into Ellen. "Jim, what?" was all Linda could manage to shout as she saw Ellen on top of me as I had the beautiful raven-haired escort. Ellen leaned forward, her hands resting on my lap and her hair scattered across her face as she bounced on top of me. "You bastard!" she screamed before her mouth seemed to slam shut as she realized the full extent of what was happening. I saw several things come at her at once. First, the bag of clothes lying on the floor at the foot of the bed. Second, the woman I had in the reverse cowgirl position was wearing a wedding dress, standing in front of Linda. "Is that my wedding dress?" screamed Linda. "My fucking Chanel wedding dress?" Linda's voice was almost unintelligible as she shouted her questions. Ellen leaned back on the pillows and I stood next to the bed, and Linda stared at it with her eyes closed, not believing what she was seeing. Her face was purple and she seemed to be having trouble breathing. Ellen stood up and, as we had discussed earlier, removed the dress, hung it on a hanger, and then handed it to me. While Ellen performed these actions, Linda stood in almost catatonic silence, and except for her pale face and rapid breathing, she stood motionless. I took the wrinkled and soiled dress with my left hand and, pointing to it with my right, said, "See? Same old Chanel dress. Nothing has changed. I'm lucky because I have a wife who loves me enough to get over her resentment and not make a bigger deal out of it than she should." My comments echoed the bullshit that Dee had tried to peddle to me at the restaurant, and that Linda had stated upon entering the house after a night with the asshole. Linda burst into tears and, sobbing, ran out of the bedroom. "Well, that was an interesting experience," Ellen said dryly. "Wasn't it? Let's take a quick shower and hit the road." 10 minutes later, I walked Ellen to her car. She reached for my neck, pulled me to her, and gave me a deep, passionate kiss, breaking one of her rules. "In case the neighbors saw your wife this morning, this kiss will give them something to gossip about." Ellen smirked and pulled away from my driveway. I swore I would wire Ellen another $1,000 as a bonus. She pulled her BMW out of my driveway, waved me off, and Ellen Fontaine was out of my life forever. I heard Linda sobbing in the living room. I sighed, thinking, there's no time like the present. Linda was sitting in one of the ivory-colored armchairs set at a 45-degree angle to each other, and I took a seat in the other chair. "You ruined my dress." Linda looked at me with eyes full of hatred. "The most precious thing I own, and you destroyed it? I guess we're even then, aren't we?" "I didn't destroy anything of yours." "Linda, the most precious thing I had was our wedding vows, our pledge of loyalty and devotion to each other. A promise to leave everyone else behind. I know it was important to you, but that dress was just an object, nothing more. And what you did was destroy the entire foundation of our marriage, and you did it in the most public and disrespectful way possible." "Well, you sure got even with me, didn't you? I think you showed me that," Linda snapped back. "It was one night out of a lifetime of nights. It was one dress out of a whole closet of dresses. Emma was supposed to be the 5th generation to wear that dress. You deprived her of that. Emma was going to live in a happy home with 2 loving parents. You deprived her of that. What do you think will affect her the most?" Linda stared at me with an almost feral expression in her eyes. "Divorce? Is that where this is going?" She hissed at me. "You'll never forgive me for what I did to that stupid fucking dress. And I'll never forgive you for sneaking around sleeping with that asshole. You're going to work the rest of your life to pay for that dress," she shouted at me. I shook my head. "Yeah, about that. This dress is listed on our insurance policy as marital property, just like this chair I'm sitting in. If I want to take that chair out into the backyard and set it on fire, I can. If I want to set that wedding dress on fire, I can, as long as I don't try to file a claim with the insurance company. Besides, the dress isn't ruined. It's stained and ruined. And I'm sure the videos of me having the opportunity to screw Ellen while she's wearing your wedding dress will never go away, nor will the stains from our marks we left on it." Linda broke into a new fit of sobs in response to my statement. Linda wrapped her arms around herself and rocked back and forth, sobbing and crying to herself. "It was just one night. It was just one night. It was just one night." Epilogue. 20 years later, Emma Kingsley, her husband, and her brother Tom had labored all morning putting tags on various trinkets, trifles, and other nonsense that belonged to Emma and Tom's mother, Linda Williams. Linda had been gone for 6 months, and Emma was dreading going through her mother's personal belongings. Emma's relationship with her mother had been complicated. After her parents' divorce, it was as if her mother had lost her mind. She had an almost pathological hatred for her ex-husband, claiming that he had destroyed everything she held dear. Ironically, Emma knew even at a young age that her mother had cheated on her father, while her father had never cheated on her mother. She knew that her father had done something that made her mother so angry that she could no longer stay married to him, but neither Emma nor Tom knew what he had done. Linda immediately moved into the home of a professional soccer player named Mark Lavaliere after it was decided that divorce was the only way out for them. It was not an easy time for Linda and her children. Although Emma and Tommy never liked Mark, he never hurt them or was unkind. They were taken all over the country to watch Mark play soccer and were able to attend the Super Bowl, sporting events, and concerts as VIPs. Linda quit her job to enjoy the wag life, and this continued for almost 2 years, until Mark got fed up with Linda and kicked her out of his house. Unemployed and homeless, Linda was forced to move into her parents' house. They had long been unhappy with their daughter and her poor decisions. She had traded a reliable, loving husband for an egregious asshole. Plus, they were discouraged by the string of losers she'd been involved with since Mark, each one worse than the last. Jim was awarded primary custody of Emma and Tommy and remained living in the family home. Since he worked from home and handled 75% of the child-rearing responsibilities, it was decided that it was in the best interest of the children that Jim would buy Linda out and stay in the house. More fuel for Linda's raging hatred of her ex-husband. 3 years after the divorce, her father remarried. Marie Fontenot was a strikingly beautiful, dark-haired woman of French descent, several years younger than her husband. Marie was a fashion designer and owned a boutique in the Gold Coast, which was the only place where her models were sold. A year before Jim met Marie, superstar singer Tony Speed, visiting Chicago for a concert, stopped by Marie's boutique with a group of her girlfriends. They fell in love with Marie's models and bought up almost the entire assortment of the boutique. When Toni was photographed in restaurants or appeared on Instagram, she gave full credit to Marie Fontenot for her image. Business exploded, and no celebrity trip to Chicago was without a trip to Marie's boutique. Marie had a large staff to run the store, allowing her to focus on her models. Emma shook her head at the memory of that. 17 years later, she was still amazed that her nerdy father had the nerve to strike up a conversation with a beautiful, successful clothing designer. She had no idea what Marie Fontenot found in her father, but marriage soon followed, and 6 months after the wedding, Jim and Marie had a daughter. Marie became a wonderful stepmother. She was kind, cheerful, and loved Emma and Tommy. She taught them to speak French, and during a family vacation in France, she took them on a tour of her hometown of Nice and the places she had often visited as a child. She then took them on a tour of Paris and all her old places. Emma adored her half-sister Ellen, who got the middle name Marie. She was better than both her father and Marie, and was a sweet, well-mannered child who followed her big sister everywhere. Emma would have been happy to help Ellen today, but she knew her mother would not have approved of her help. Linda despised Marie. She always insisted that she had seen Marie somewhere before, but couldn't identify her face. She often said that Jim had probably been cheating on her all along. No one believed it because everyone in the family knew that Linda had been cheating on her husband with Marc Lavilliere and had moved into his house before the divorce was finalized. It was further proof of Linda's pathological hatred for her ex-husband. Emma's father wept at his ex-wife's funeral. Marie put her arm around her husband's waist as they stood together looking at Linda in the casket. There were few mourners for Linda in the chapel. Her parents were dead and her friends had long since left her, most of them separated after their own divorces. Linda never married, and as she aged and her appearance faded, she increasingly shut herself off from everyone but her son and daughter. Tom came out of his mother's closet carrying an antique white canvas garment bag with tan leather trim and matching colored tan leather straps and buckles holding the bag closed. Tom unbuckled the straps, opened the bag, and pulled out a stained and wrinkled dress. The lace and beading on the dress was still in good condition, but the dress itself looked used and discarded. Tom asked his sister how to appraise the dress. "When I was a little girl, my mom used to talk about some special dress that was kept in the family for a long time, but after the divorce, she never mentioned it again. I can't believe it could have been that dress. If it was worth anything, she would have taken better care of it." Emma thought for a moment, mentally calculating the cost of the dress. "Put a $50 price tag on it, but if someone offers more than $10, we'll take it."